Boston in early autumn had a way of making everything look intentional. The brick sidewalks, the measured pace of the Charles River, the clean geometry of glass offices rising beside centuries-old buildings, it all suggested balance. Ethan Walker liked to believe his life mirrored that symmetry. From the outside, it did. He and Claire lived in a renovated brownstone in Back Bay, the kind of place friends described as tasteful and real estate blogs photographed endlessly. Ethan worked at a mid-sized architectural firm, designing sustainable commercial spaces that would never bear his name, but would stand quietly for decades. Claire thrived in a different ecosystem altogether, deadlines measured in hours, not years, value determined by visibility. Every morning followed a ritual. Ethan woke first, brewed coffee strong enough to cut through sleep, and read industry articles on his tablet. Claire joined him later, scrolling through her phone, double-tapping photos, responding to comments with practiced warmth. "You're quiet," she said one morning, not looking up. "I always am," Ethan replied gently. She smiled, the reflexive kind. That's true. They had learned each other's rhythms early in their marriage. Claire filled silences. Ethan respected them. It had once felt complimentary. On social media, they were enviable. Claire curated their life carefully: Sunday brunches, charity galas, candid shots of Ethan laughing when he didn't know a camera was on him. The captions spoke of gratitude, love, and balance. Friends commented with heart emojis and inside jokes. Strangers admired what they assumed was intimacy. What no one saw were the small hesitations, the way Claire stayed later at work, claiming deadlines and campaigns that couldn't wait, the way Ethan stopped asking when she'd be home, the way conversations narrowed to logistics, dinner plans, weekend obligations, mortgage payments, while everything meaningful remained untouched. Claire's world revolved around attention. Her agency rewarded those who stayed visible, connected, indispensable. That was where Mark Reynolds came in, creative director. Charismatic, always saying the right thing at exactly the right moment. He noticed Claire's ideas in meetings. He praised her instincts. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't realized she was missing. At first, it was harmless. Late emails, shared jokes, compliments disguised as professional feedback. Ethan noticed the shift not because of what Claire did, but because of what she stopped doing. She no longer told him stories. There had been a time when she came home energized, recounting office politics with dramatic flair. Now, when he asked about her day, she answered in summaries. Busy, productive, same as always. One evening, Ethan stood in the kitchen, listening to Claire talk animatedly on the phone in the other room. She was laughing, a full, unguarded laugh he hadn't heard in weeks. When she noticed him, the call ended abruptly. "Who was that?" he asked, not suspicious, just curious. "Work," she said too quickly. "Mark." The name meant nothing to him then. They lay in bed that night facing opposite walls. Ethan stared at the faint crack in the ceiling, tracing it with his eyes. He told himself this was normal. Marriages changed shape. Passion evolved into routine. Stability was not a failure. Still, something felt misaligned. The city outside hummed with life sirens in the distance, laughter drifting up from the street. Ethan wondered when his own life had become so quiet. He wondered if Claire noticed, or if, in her world of constant noise, silence had become something to escape. He did not yet know that this quiet was the beginning of an ending, not marked by shouting or slammed doors, but by the slow realization that love, unattended, does not disappear loudly. It fades. The affair did not begin with desire. It began with permission. Claire told herself that often, repeating it until it sounded like truth. Permission to stay late. Permission to answer messages after midnight. Permission to feel proud when someone noticed how sharp her instincts were, how effortlessly she navigated rooms full of ambition and ego. At Ardent Creative, validation was currency, and Mark Reynolds spent it generously. He never crossed a line outright, not at first. He lingered near her desk longer than necessary, asked for her opinion when others were already speaking, forwarded articles with notes like, "Thought of you when I read this." Small things, harmless things, the kind that felt insulting to question. You have a way of seeing what people actually want, he told her once, leaning against the glass wall of a conference room after everyone else had left. That's rare. Claire smiled, warmth blooming in her chest. Ethan used to say things like that years ago, when they were still building something instead of maintaining it. Mark noticed when she cut her hair. He noticed when she seemed tired. He noticed when she doubted herself. Ethan, meanwhile, noticed what was missing. He noticed how Claire's phone never left her hand, how it faced down on the table during dinner, how she showered later, lingered longer in front of the mirror, choosing outfits with a care that felt newly deliberate. None of it was enough to accuse. It was enough to feel. Ethan had always trusted patterns more than people. Buildings failed when small miscalculations stacked unnoticed. Relationships were no different. One Friday night, Claire came home near midnight, heels in her hand, hair smelling faintly of citrus and something sharper, whiskey maybe. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, a half-finished sketch glowing on the screen. "You didn't text," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "I lost track of time," she replied too easily. "We had drinks after work." "We?" he nodded. "Anyone I know?" She hesitated, just a fraction of a second. The team. That night she turned away from him in bed, already scrolling through messages. The glow of her screen cut through the dark like a blade. Ethan closed his eyes and let the moment pass. He had learned long ago that pushing against something unseen only made it retreat further. The first physical line was crossed months later, though neither of them could have named the exact moment. It happened after a client pitch that ran long, stretched into celebratory drinks, then into quiet when the bar emptied and the city softened around them. They stood on the sidewalk, autumn air curling between them. Mark reached out not to kiss her, but to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. The touch lingered a second too long. Claire didn't step back. The kiss that followed was brief, almost polite. No urgency, no heat, just confirmation. Afterwards, she walked home alone, heart pounding, not with guilt, but with something dangerously close to relief, as if a question she hadn't dared ask had finally been answered. She told herself it meant nothing. At home, Ethan slept lightly. He always did. When Claire slipped into bed, he stirred but didn't wake fully. Her body felt tense beside him, unfamiliar. She lay rigid, staring at the ceiling, replaying the evening in fragments she both clung to and wanted erased. Ethan sensed the change the next morning. He always did. It was in the way she avoided his eyes, in the forced brightness of her voice, in the sudden tenderness that felt rehearsed when an arm around his waist, a kiss pressed too deliberately against his cheek. Guilt had a texture. Ethan could feel it without naming it. Weeks passed. The affair grew not in intensity, but in dependence. Mark became her confidant, her mirror. He asked about her marriage with curiosity that felt like concern. "Are you happy?" he asked once, seated across from her in a dim restaurant far from the office. Claire opened her mouth to answer and found she didn't know how. "I think so," she said finally. Mark studied her. "That pause says more than your words." She laughed it off, but the comment stayed with her, echoing in quiet moments. Ethan, meanwhile, began cataloging absences. Claire missed a dinner with his parents. She forgot their anniversary until noon. She stopped asking about his projects altogether. One evening, as she showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Ethan glanced at it reflexively, not to invade, but because the sound broke his concentration. A name flashed briefly on the screen before disappearing. Mark R. Ethan didn't pick up the phone. He didn't unlock it. He didn't need to. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, breathing slow and measured. This was not shock. It was recognition. Later that night, Claire curled against him, seeking closeness as if proximity could undo distance. Ethan held her, staring into the dark, every sense alert. He could feel the lie between them like a third body. The next morning, he woke early and left for work without kissing her goodbye. Claire noticed, but said nothing. The betrayal was still quiet, still slow, still deniable. But something irreversible had already begun. Ethan understood that before Claire ever did. And in that understanding, a decision, still unformed, still a name, started to take shape. Ethan did not go looking for the truth. That was the part he would remember later, the restraint of it, the discipline. He never checked Claire's phone while she slept, never followed her location, never read her emails. In a world where suspicion had become a reason to surveil, Ethan still believed that trust, once reduced to proof hunting, was already dead. The truth came to him anyway. It arrived one quiet Sunday afternoon, disguised as coincidence. Ethan had left his sketchbook at home and returned early from the office. A rare thing. The brownstone was unusually still, the kind of silence that felt hollow rather than peaceful. Claire wasn't home. He assumed she was at a brunch or an event, something work-adjacent. There was always something. As he passed the dining table, he noticed her laptop open. That alone meant nothing. Claire often worked from everywhere, couch, bed, kitchen counter, but the screen was still awake, an email thread open, frozen mid-scroll. Ethan didn't move closer at first. He stood there, keys still in his hand, as if the distance itself might preserve some fragile boundary. Then he saw his own name. I can't keep lying to Ethan like this. The sentence sat in the center of the screen, plain and devastating. Ethan set his keys down slowly. His heart did not race. It slowed, settling into something heavy and precise. He stepped closer, not to read everything, just enough. Mark's replies were careful, measured, intimate in the way only ongoing intimacy could be. You don't owe him your unhappiness. We didn't plan this. You deserve more than silence. There were timestamps stretching back months, inside jokes. References to nights Ethan had believed Claire was working late. Hotels mentioned casually, as if they were footnotes. There it was, not the betrayal itself that he had already sensed, but its shape, its duration, its comfort. Ethan closed the laptop without scrolling further. He sat down at the table, hands flat against the wood, grounding himself in something solid. The room felt unfamiliar, like a space he had rented rather than built. Every object suddenly seemed to belong to a version of his life that no longer existed. When Claire came home later, carrying flowers she must have bought for herself, Ethan was in the kitchen cooking dinner. "You're home early," she said, startled. "Work slowed down," he replied. She kissed his cheek. He noticed how her lips lingered a fraction too long, as if checking for damage. He said nothing. Dinner passed quietly. Claire talked about a campaign. Ethan asked polite questions. His voice remained steady, his expressions neutral. If she noticed anything different, she didn't comment. That night, lying beside her, Ethan stared into the dark and cataloged what he now knew. He knew her affair wasn't a mistake. It was a parallel life. He knew she had discussed him, his flaws, his silence, with another man. He knew she was still deciding whether to choose guilt or honesty. What he did not know was why she hadn't told him yet. That question hurt more than the answers he already had. Days passed. Ethan moved through them with surgical care. He did not withdraw affection entirely. He reduced it. He did not accuse, he observed. He noticed how Claire watched him now, cautiously, as if sensing a shift she couldn't name. Silence became his language. In that silence, Ethan realized something that unsettled him. Confrontation would change nothing. If he exposed the affair, Claire would cry. She would apologize. She would explain work stress, loneliness, distance. She would ask for forgiveness or for time. Either way, the burden of decision would be placed back into his hands, along with the expectation of repair. He wasn't sure he wanted that. One evening, Claire finally asked, "Are you mad at me?" Ethan looked at her across the living room. She was curled into the corner of the couch, knees drawn up, trying to look small. "No," he said truthfully. "I'm thinking." "About what?" "Us." Her breath caught. He could see it. She nodded slowly. "Okay." That was all. The restraint began to change the air between them. Claire grew restless. She filled the silence with unnecessary chatter, with plans and reassurances Ethan hadn't asked for. "I'm going to take a few days off soon," she said one night. "We could go somewhere." "Where?" She shrugged. "Anywhere." Ethan smiled faintly. "Anywhere doesn't exist." She laughed too loudly. "You always say that." What he didn't say was that nowhere was becoming very real. The fracture widened not through arguments, but through absence of truth. Claire sensed the distance but misread it as fatigue. She tried to bridge it with gestures, cooking his favorite meals, initiating intimacy that felt suddenly urgent. Ethan responded with gentleness and restraint. He did not reject her. He did not fully accept her either. In his mind, something had already shifted from whether to how. One night, long after Claire had fallen asleep, Ethan got up and stood in the doorway of their bedroom. He watched her breathe, her face softened by sleep, unguarded. This was the woman he had loved without contingency. "I know," he whispered, not to her, but to himself. The words felt final. The next morning, Ethan opened a new email account. He began updating his resume. He researched firms in other cities' places, far enough to become unreachable, close enough to remain real. Claire noticed him packing away old photos from his desk. "Why are you doing that?" she asked. "I don't need them at work anymore." She frowned. "Is something wrong?" Ethan met her eyes. For a moment, the truth hovered between them, heavy and unspoken. "Yes," he said quietly. Then he looked away. That was the moment the relationship broke, not with revelation, not with anger, but with choice. Ethan had discovered the truth. And by choosing silence, he had already begun to leave. Ethan did not leave all at once. He dismantled his life the way he designed buildings, quietly, deliberately, with an eye toward permanence. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would trigger alarms until it was already too late. He began with work. On a gray Tuesday morning, he sat across from his supervisor in a glass-walled office overlooking the Charles River. The city moved below them, indifferent. "I'm resigning," Ethan said, voice steady. His supervisor blinked. "Resigning? You're leading the Hanover project." "I know. Is this about money? We can talk." Ethan shook his head. "It's about direction." No one pressed further. In Boston's professional world, reinvention was respected, even envied. His resignation was accepted with surprise, not suspicion. 2 weeks' notice. Handovers. Polite goodbyes. At home, Claire noticed the shift only in fragments. "You're working less," she said one evening. "Wrapping things up," he replied. She assumed it meant a break, a reset, maybe even the vacation she'd suggested. She was wrong. Ethan opened a new bank account at a different institution. He forwarded his mail to a P.O. box. He deleted his LinkedIn profile first, then Instagram, then everything else. Years of digital presence erased in minutes, as if he had never curated a life at all. At night, he lay awake beside Claire, listening to her breathe. She slept soundly now, comforted by his physical presence, unaware that it was already becoming a memory. The hardest part was deciding what to take. He packed lightly. Clothes, books he had owned before the marriage, his sketchbooks, a watch his father had given him. Everything else, the furniture, the shared photographs, the wedding gifts, he left untouched. Archaeology for someone else to interpret. On his final morning in the house, Ethan woke before dawn. The city outside was hushed, streets washed clean by rain. Claire slept on her side, facing away from him, hair spilling across the pillow. He stood there for a long time. This was the moment most people imagined differently. A note on the nightstand, a final look, an explanation owed. Ethan wrote nothing, not because he lacked words, but because words would invite negotiation. And he knew himself well enough to know that if Claire cried, if she confessed, if she reached for him and promised truth at last, he might stay. Staying would destroy him. He closed the door quietly behind him. By the time Claire woke, the house felt wrong. It was subtle at first, an absence she couldn't immediately name. Then she noticed Ethan's side of the bed untouched, his phone gone from the charger, the closet door slightly ajar, revealing more space than before. "Ethan," she called. No answer. She moved through the house, heart beginning to thud. His desk was cleared. The photos were gone. His toothbrush missing. Panic rose sharp and fast. She called his phone, straight to voicemail. She texted, no response. By noon, she was frantic. She called his office. "He resigned," the receptionist said, confused. "Didn't he tell you?" The world tilted. Claire drove home shaking, replaying the last weeks in her mind, searching for a fight, a warning, something she could have misunderstood. There had been distance, but not goodbye. Silence. but not abandonment. She searched his laptop. Nothing. Checked their shared accounts. Some funds were gone, not emptied, but carefully divided. Methodical. Thought through. That scared her more than rage would have. Days passed. Claire told herself there had been an accident, a breakdown, a misunderstanding. She called hospitals, mutual friends. Ethan's parents, who were just as shocked, just as uninformed. He said he needed time, his mother said hesitantly. That's all? Time. Weeks passed, then months. Claire stopped telling people Ethan was away. The phrase began to rot in her mouth. She said nothing instead. She avoided questions. She withdrew from social events, then threw herself obsessively into work to fill the space he had left behind. At night, she lay alone in the bed they had shared, staring at the ceiling crack Ethan used to trace with his eyes. She remembered how he had gone quiet, how she had assumed it meant patience. She replayed conversations, searching for the moment she could have stopped this. The unanswered questions became a form of punishment. Did he know everything? Had he planned this long before leaving? Did he hate her? She wrote emails she never sent, long confessions, apologies, explanations that now sounded hollow even to her. She deleted them all. Mark noticed her unraveling. You should talk to him, he said one night. He won't answer. Mark hesitated. Maybe this is his way of ending things. Claire laughed bitterly. Without saying anything? Yes, Mark said quietly. Some people do that. She looked at him then, not with longing, but with a clarity that startled her. Mark had been a mirror, a distraction, a validation. He had never been the center. Ethan had been. She ended the affair shortly after. Not in a dramatic confession, but in a single sentence. I can't do this anymore. Mark didn't argue. Years later, Ethan would live under a different skyline, known by a different version of himself. He would rent a modest apartment, walk everywhere, speak less. He would build a life so quiet it could not be found by accident. Claire would learn that disappearance is not the absence of someone, it is the presence of everything they leave behind. And in the silence Ethan chose, she would finally hear the truth she had avoided for too long. Time did not heal so much as it rearranged. For Ethan, it thinned out the noise until only what mattered remained. He settled in Portland, Oregon, a city that did not ask for explanations. Rain softened its edges. People minded their own lives. He rented a modest apartment above a bakery that smelled like yeast and warmth at dawn, and he learned the rhythm of the neighborhood when the delivery trucks arrived, when the bar downstairs turned quiet, when the streetlights flickered on like tired eyes. He found work with a small design studio that specialized in adaptive, reuse-old factories turned into libraries, warehouses into schools, buildings with pasts, structures that had survived something. That appealed to him. Ethan walked to work every morning, sketchbook under his arm. He drank his coffee black. He spoke little and listened carefully. No one asked about his marriage. No one searched for him online. The absence he had created held. At night, he cooked simple meals and read until sleep came naturally. Sometimes he woke from dreams where Boston still existed, brick sidewalks, the smell of rain on stone, Claire's laughter drifting through a room. Those dreams no longer tore at him. They arrived gently, then faded. What surprised him most was not the loneliness. It was the relief, the constant vigilance, the waiting for explanations, the tension of half-truths was gone. In its place was a quiet that asked nothing of him. He began to feel like himself again, not the version curated for marriage or compromise, but the person he had been before love demanded translation. He stopped checking his email for messages that would never come. He did not change his name. He simply stopped announcing it. For Claire, time was louder. Boston rewarded her ambition the way it always had. After Ethan disappeared, she threw herself into work with a ferocity that impressed everyone and unsettled those closest to her. She stayed later, took on more accounts, traveled constantly. Her agency promoted her faster than expected. Success followed her like proof. She moved into a high-rise downtown, trading the brownstone for glass and height. Her social media filled again panels she spoke on, campaigns she led, photos taken from rooftops at sunset. People admired her resilience, her independence. No one asked about Ethan anymore. That, oddly, hurt the most. At night, the apartment felt cavernous. She slept on one side of the bed out of habit. When insomnia struck, and it often did, she replayed the same questions on a loop. Had he waited for her to confess? Had she missed her chance by staying silent too long? Was his disappearance punishment or mercy? Guilt became ambient, like background noise she learned to live with, but never quite tuned out. It surfaced in small, unexpected ways. When she saw a man sketching on the subway, when a bakery window glowed warm against a gray morning, when silence stretched too long at a dinner party. She dated briefly and without enthusiasm. Men admired her confidence, her independence. None of them touched the place Ethan had occupied, not because he had been perfect, but because he had been present in a way she hadn't understood until he was gone. Years passed. Claire stopped telling the story of his disappearance as a mystery. She began telling it as a fact. He left, she'd say, tone neutral. No explanation. People responded with sympathy, curiosity, sometimes admiration. How strong you must be, their faces seemed to say. Strength, Claire learned, was easy to perform. Grounding was harder. On the 5th anniversary of his vanishing, she opened a box she had sealed and hidden in the back of her closet. Inside were fragments of a life she no longer lived, old photographs, a wedding invitation draft, Ethan's handwriting on scraps of paper he'd left around the house. One note stopped her breath. Anywhere doesn't exist. She sat on the floor back against the bed and cried for the first time in years, not for what she had lost, but for what she had failed to protect. Ethan rarely thought of forgiveness, not because he held on to anger, but because anger had never been the point. What he had needed was distance enough to hear himself think. In that space, something settled. He learned that love did not obligate endurance, that leaving could be an act of self-preservation, not cruelty, that silence, when chosen, could be honest. Occasionally, he wondered if Claire was happy. The thought passed without pain. He volunteered on weekends, helped restore an old community center by the river. He made friends slowly, people who accepted his quiet as part of the landscape. He dated once briefly, but stopped when he realized he wasn't ready to let someone read him yet. He wasn't closed. He was careful. Claire, meanwhile, reached the heights she had once believed would complete her. The promotion came with a corner office and a team of her own. The applause was loud, the expectations louder. She smiled for photos, accepted congratulations, felt hollow the entire evening. That night, she searched for Ethan online for the first time in years. Nothing. No profiles, no articles, no mentions. It was as if he had been edited out of the world. Panic flared, sharp and unexpected. She hired a private investigator, not with urgency, but with a quiet, desperate hope that knowledge itself might be absolution. Weeks later, the report arrived thin. A city, a general profession, no address. He was alive. That knowledge did not comfort her. It haunted. Claire began writing letters she never mailed. Apologies stripped of justification. Admissions without defense. She did not ask for him back. She did not explain herself. She simply told the truth. Each letter ended the same way. I understand if you never respond. Understanding, she realized, had come too late. Time passed. The guilt did not lessen. It sharpened, refined by years of reflection into something almost clean. She no longer blamed ambition, or loneliness, or silence. She blamed the choice she had made and the one she hadn't. Ethan rebuilt a life defined by presence. Claire built one defined by achievement. Both survived. Only one of them felt at peace. And somewhere between cities, years, and unspoken words, the space between them narrowed not in distance, but in inevitability. Because absence, no matter how complete, has a way of eventually asking to be acknowledged. Claire's collapse did not arrive with spectacle. There was no scandal, no public failure, no dramatic unraveling for anyone to witness. It came quietly, through exhaustion, through numbness, through the creeping realization that every achievement now felt like an echo instead of a victory. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. She stood in her corner office, the city spread beneath her in sharp lines and reflective glass, listening to a junior executive present a campaign Claire herself had conceived years earlier. The room was filled with nodding heads, impressed murmurs. This should have felt like validation. Instead, Claire felt detached, as if she were watching someone else's life through a window she could no longer open. Her chest tightened. Her breath shortened. The words in the room blurred into noise. "I need a minute," she said, standing abruptly. She barely made it to the restroom before the shaking started. Hands braced against the sink, she stared at her reflection, polished, composed, unfamiliar. The woman looking back at her had everything she had once wanted, and nothing that anchored her. Her doctor called it burnout, recommended rest, a sabbatical, therapy. Claire agreed to all of it. The first weeks away from work felt disorienting. Without deadlines to outrun her thoughts, the past resurfaced with clarity she could no longer deflect. Silence, real silence, filled her days. And in that silence, Ethan returned. Not as anger, not even as longing, as an unanswered question that refused to stay buried. One afternoon, sitting alone in her apartment, Claire opened a drawer she rarely touched. Inside were the letters she had written over the years and never sent. Confessions without witnesses, apologies without absolution. She read them slowly, one by one. They all circled the same truth. She did not know whether she wanted Ethan to forgive her, to confirm that she deserved the weight she carried. That realization frightened her more than rejection would have. She called the private investigator again. "I want everything you can find," she said. "Address, routine, anything." Weeks passed. When the email finally came, it was brief. Portland, Oregon. Architecture firm, community work, no listed phone number. Claire stared at the screen long after it dimmed. He had built a life. That knowledge landed heavy and sharp. She had always imagined Ethan frozen in the moment he left, angry, wounded, suspended in unresolved pain. Instead, he had moved on. The flight to Portland felt unreal, like crossing into a version of the world she was no longer entitled to enter. She rented a car she barely noticed driving. Rain streaked the windshield, blurring the city into soft edges and muted colors. She parked across the street from a modest brick building and sat there for nearly an hour. This was where he worked. There was no plan beyond showing up, no script, no guarantee he would even agree to see her. She watched people come and go, young architects, older project managers, faces relaxed in a way she hadn't seen in years. And then she saw him. Ethan stepped out onto the sidewalk with a rolled set of drawings under his arm. He looked thinner, calmer, his hair threaded with gray at the temples. He wore no wedding ring. He smiled at someone passing by. The sight of it, unforced, genuine, nearly broke her. Claire's hands trembled as she opened the car door. Her legs felt unsteady, like she had stood up too fast after years of sitting still. "Ethan," she said. He stopped. The sound of her voice, his name spoken by her, cut through the street noise cleanly. He turned slowly, as if already bracing himself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Recognition passed through his face, not shock, not anger, just understanding. "Claire," he said, that was all. She searched his expression desperately for something, resentment, warmth, anything that would tell her how this would go. His face revealed nothing. "I didn't know if you'd—" Her voice faltered. She inhaled sharply. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me." "I didn't know you were looking," he replied. The honesty of it steadied her. "I don't know why I'm here," she said, and hated herself for the truth of it. "I don't know if I'm asking for forgiveness or punishment." Ethan studied her quietly. Years of silence rested between them, heavy but no longer sharp. "Then maybe," he said gently, "we should sit down before you decide." They walked to a nearby cafe without touching, without rushing. Rain tapped softly against the windows as they sat across from each other, two people bound by a past neither could undo. Claire noticed everything now, the steadiness of his hands, the way he listened without interrupting, the absence of expectation in his eyes. This was not the man she had left behind. And that frightened her more than anger ever could, because whatever came next, she knew one thing with aching clarity. She could no longer hide from what she had done. And Ethan, composed, present, was no longer hiding from anything at all. The cafe was small and unassuming. the kind of place built for conversations meant to stay contained. Rain pressed softly against the windows, blurring the street into streaks of gray and amber. Steam rose from their cups, curling between them like something alive. For a long moment, neither Ethan nor Claire spoke. It wasn't awkward. It was deliberate. Ethan wrapped his hands around his mug, grounding himself in the warmth. Claire watched him do it, remembering how he used to do the same on winter mornings in Boston, fingers steady, posture contained, as if he had always known how to hold things without spilling. "You look well," she said finally. "So do you," he replied. It was true in a superficial way. Claire was polished, composed, still beautiful in the way success seemed to reinforce. But Ethan could see the tension beneath it, the careful control, the exhaustion disguised as poise. They exchanged small facts at first. Neutral territory, Portland, the firm, the weather, Boston in passing, as if it were a city neither of them had ever lived in. Then the silence returned, heavier now. "I didn't know if you were alive," Claire said quietly. "I was," Ethan answered. "I am." She nodded, swallowing. "You didn't leave anything, no note, no message. I know. Why?" The question had waited years for air. Now that it had it, it trembled. Ethan looked out the window before answering. He watched a couple hurry past, sharing an umbrella, their shoulders pressed together against the rain. "Because if I explained," he said slowly, "you would have responded, and if you responded, I would have stayed." Claire's breath hitched. "That's not," she stopped herself. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed, but it was honest. The words settled between them, sharp but clean. She folded her hands tightly in her lap. "I would have told you the truth." "I know," Ethan said. "You were already close." Her eyes lifted, startled. "You knew?" "Yes." The admission landed like a quiet collapse. "How long?" she asked. "Long enough." Tears filled her eyes, uninvited and immediate. "Why didn't you say anything?" Ethan met her gaze fully now. His eyes were calm, but not empty. "Because I didn't want to argue about something that was already true." She let out a broken sound, half laugh, half sob. "I thought you were just distant. I was deciding who I wanted to become after you." The honesty of it hurt more than accusation ever could. "I'm sorry," Claire said. The words came out raw, stripped of performance. "I'm sorry for the affair, for the lies, for thinking I could live two lives and call it survival." Ethan listened. He did not interrupt. He did not nod. He simply let the apology exist. "I thought if I kept everything moving," she continued, "nothing would catch up with me. Then you disappeared, and everything stopped." He considered that. "I didn't disappear to punish you," he said. "I left to save myself." She wiped at her eyes. "I deserved an explanation." "You deserved honesty," he corrected gently. "So did I." They sat with that. Memories surfaced, unbidden late nights cooking together, shared jokes, the way Ethan used to reach for her hand in crowds without looking. They hovered between them like ghosts neither could fully claim. "I never stopped thinking about you," Claire admitted. "I did," Ethan said. Then after a pause, "For a while," her chest tightened. "And now I think about what was, not what could have been. The distinction was everything." She nodded slowly. "I don't want us back," she said, surprising herself with the truth. "Not like before." Ethan watched her closely. "What do you want?" "I want to stop carrying this," she said. "I want to know if you hate me." He shook his head. "I don't." Her shoulders sagged in relief and then confusion. "Then what do you feel?" Ethan searched for the word. Clarity. It was not the answer she had expected. It was worse and better. They talked until their coffee went cold. About time, about change, about the versions of themselves that no longer existed. When they stood to leave, the rain had slowed to a mist. Outside, they paused on the sidewalk, the space between them measured and intentional. "This is goodbye," Claire said softly. Ethan nodded. "Yes." She hesitated, then asked the question she had carried for years. "Will you ever forgive me?" He looked at her for a long moment, seeing not the woman who had betrayed him, but the one who had finally stopped running. "Yes," he said. Her breath left her in a rush. "But forgiveness," he continued, "is not an invitation." She closed her eyes, absorbing the truth of it. When she opened them again, there was sadness there, but also acceptance. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan inclined his head, a small respectful gesture. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the quiet rhythm of the street. Claire stood there long after, watching the space he had occupied empty itself. The meeting had not undone the past, but it had finally allowed it to end. Forgiveness did not arrive all at once. It unfolded quietly in the days after the meeting, settling into places neither Ethan nor Claire had expected. Ethan walked home through streets damp with rain, his steps unhurried. The conversation replayed in fragments, not the confession, not the apology, but the stillness between words. He noticed that his chest felt lighter, not because something had been taken away, but because something had finally been set down. That evening, he cooked dinner for one. He opened the windows despite the chill, letting the city breathe into the apartment. As he ate, he realized something that surprised him. He was not replaying alternative endings. He was not wondering what would have happened if he had stayed, if he had spoken, if she had chosen differently. The story felt finished. In the days that followed, Ethan returned to his routines with a renewed sense of intention. He walked the same routes, sketched the same buildings, drank coffee at the same corner cafe. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. For the first time in years, his past no longer felt like a closed room behind him. It felt like a chapter he could reference without flinching. One afternoon, while volunteering at the community center, Ethan caught himself laughing fully, unexpectedly. The sound startled him. It had been a long time since joy had arrived without hesitation. That night, he removed the last box he had never unpacked since moving to Portland. Inside were old notes, photographs he had once been unable to look at, reminders of a life interrupted. He sorted through them calmly, keeping what still held meaning, discarding what no longer did. He slept deeply. Peace, he learned, was not the absence of pain, but the absence of resistance to it. Claire returned to Boston carrying less than she had arrived with. On the flight home, she watched the clouds pass beneath her, feeling something unfamiliar spread through her chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't relief. It was release. The guilt that had once pressed against her every decision no longer demanded attention. It did not vanish, but it softened, transformed from a punishment into a reminder. She did not tell anyone about the meeting. There was no version of the story that could explain it cleanly. Some truths were meant to remain private, earned through endurance rather than shared for validation. Back in her apartment, Claire unpacked slowly. She removed the letters from her drawer and placed them, finally, in the recycling bin. Not because they no longer mattered, but because they had served their purpose. At work, she declined a promotion that would have consumed the rest of her life. Instead, she negotiated flexibility, time, space. People noticed the change, though no one named it. She began therapy again, not out of crisis, but out of commitment. In the evenings, she cooked instead of ordering in. She walked without headphones. She allowed silence to exist without filling it. Some nights she thought of Ethan not with longing, but with gratitude. Would he had given her something she had not known how to ask for. An ending. Weeks later, a small envelope arrived at Ethan's apartment. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I won't write again. I just wanted you to know that your forgiveness didn't bring you back to me. It brought me back to myself. Thank you for leaving the way you did." Ethan read the letter once. Then he folded it carefully and placed it in a drawer, not as something to revisit, but as something complete. Months passed. Spring arrived in Portland quietly, green pushing through concrete, light stretching longer into the evenings. One morning, Ethan met someone at the bakery downstairs, an easy conversation, unforced, unexpected. They talked again the next week, then again. There was no rush, no urgency to define anything. He was no longer afraid of beginnings. Claire stood at a speaking event months later, addressing a room full of young professionals. She spoke about ambition, about success, about the cost of choosing visibility over presence. "I used to think walking away meant failure," she said. Now I understand that sometimes the bravest thing someone can do is leave and let the truth follow. She did not mention Ethan by name. She didn't need to. Forgiveness, they both learned, does not always repair what was broken. Sometimes it does something quieter and far more enduring. It frees. Ethan walked forward without being haunted. Claire lived on without being condemned. They did not return to each other, and because of that, they were finally whole.